What makes the switch axe such a unique weapon is that it can transform into a sword that deals a ton of damage, and it's all thanks to its phial system. That's its main source of damage. So in this video, we'll be taking a closer look at how different skills interact with the switch axe's phial system. We will do a side-by-side comparison and do some math calculations so that we can find out which ones are the best skills to equip to maximize these phials. And later on in the video, we will break down the unique interaction of the crit element skill while the switch axe is in sword mode. So stay tuned for that, because honestly, it's pretty amazing. But before we get ahead of ourselves with damage numbers, let's first take a look at some quality of life skills. Now you would assume that since the switch axe is a transforming weapon, quick work would have some effect on the weapon. But when I tested it side by side, I was quite surprised to find out that quick work had no effect at all. Transforming back and forth between the two modes regardless of quick work showed the same results. It just goes to show that the switch axe already transforms quite fast in Monster Hunter now, and it's great that we don't have to worry about adding quick work into our builds. But I was kinda hoping that quick work would speed up the lengthy animation of the morph combo from axe mode, but sadly it had no effects. Another quality of life skill for the switch axe is Power Prolonger. This time, it did have some effects on the switch axe's phial gauge. It lessens the gauge consumption of sword attacks, allowing you to do more attacks with your sword and even extend your sword combos. With only half of your phial gauge, having no Power Prolonger skills or having just Power Prolonger level 1, you will only have enough gauge to reach up until the double swing attack of the sword combo. But with Power Prolonger level 2 up to level 5, half a gauge will get you up until the Heavensward Flurry part of the sword combo. Still quite not enough to reach the Elemental Discharge finisher. It seems like having more than 2 points of Power Prolonger doesn't seem to provide any more value. Now, if you have a full phial gauge, regardless of whether you have Power Prolonger or not, you will still reach the Element Discharge finisher, but you will use up all your phial gauge. This is assuming that you have a big opening to do the whole combo without being interrupted. If the monster attacks you and you have to dodge, sadly you won't have enough gauge to complete the combo anymore. But if you have Power Prolonger level 1, a tiny bit of your phial gauge will be left after completing the whole sword combo. With each additional level of Power Prolonger, you get a bit more gauge. You get so much more phial gauge left over with Power Prolonger level 2 compared to just having level 1. But again, having more than Power Prolonger level 2, you start to see some diminishing returns, and you just don't get as much more phial gauge left over to justify equipping more than level 2. Now, if you're thinking about adding Power Prolonger in your builds, I think level 2 is the sweet spot. I believe status switch axes with power element phials will benefit the most from this skill, because being able to do more sword attacks means you can build up more status on the monster. That's why I think having Power Prolonger will be essential for the Volvidon switch axe. By taking advantage of its power element phials, you can build up paralysis faster, and once you paralyze the monster, you want to have enough phial gauge to complete the sword combo all the way until the Element Discharge finisher to capitalize on the opportunity. But for raw and elemental switch axes, you can skip Power Prolonger altogether and just manage your gauge wisely by efficiently alternating between axe and sword mode. Managing your phial gauge in Monster Hunter now is pretty easy, and you're better off equipping more damage skills like Morph Boost. Morph Boost is a solid skill for the switch axe. It buffs your total damage, not just your raw attack power. You only get this buff for 10 seconds, but you can easily keep it active for most of the hunt by just playing the switch axe normally. The moment you run out of phial gauge, you transform back into axe mode, and it activates the buff. Build up enough phial gauge and switch to sword mode, and it activates the buff once again. So it flows naturally with the switch axe's gameplay, and that makes it an overall solid option for any switch axe build. Now, for the longest time, elemental weapons have been the meta, and the switch axe just made them even better with the addition of power element phials. This phial type increases your weapon's elemental attack by 25%. Wow. That's huge! While power phials only increase raw attack power by 15%. Power element phials get even crazier when you combine them with the critical element skill. You get an even greater buff because power element phials stack with critical element. The way it works is that when you're in sword mode, you take the 25% buff from element phials and add it together with the critical element buff. So with crit element level 3, you get a 75% elemental attack buff while in sword mode. And if you equip a Silver Rathalos weapon and get crit element level 5, you get over 105% increase to your elemental attack. The Silver Rathalos switch axe is such an insane weapon, and it's probably the best Silver Rathalos weapon. The Silver Rathalos Dual Blizz is just way too hard to upgrade, because it requires both Gold Rathian and Silver Rathalos pieces. And I just think it's gonna take way too much time to farm for those materials. Now, if you're thinking of adding elemental attack skills to your switch axe build, it's important to note that sadly, elemental attack does not scale with element phials. They just provide a flat damage increase. So, it looks like crit element builds are still the meta and the best way to get the most damage. And with the addition of switch axes and power element phials, the skill just got even better. Switch axe attacks are quite fast, so they also benefit greatly from crit skills. So of course, pairing the switch axe with crit skills like crit eye and weakness exploit is ideal. So those are the important skills you need to consider when making your switch axe builds. If you guys want a more in-depth guide on the switch axes combos, you can check out my previous video. And if you found the critical element calculations hard to understand, then you better check out this video next where I explain how damage is calculated in Monster Hunter Now.